You hear it before you feel it. A dry snap somewhere inside your leg. Then the ground comes up and the world goes white. You are 40,000 years old, and you've just become the slowest thing on this landscape. Nobody is coming with a splint. Nobody is coming with a needle. There is no word yet for hospital, and there will not be one for another 39,000 years. What happens to you now is not decided by medicine. It is decided by the people standing over you. And by the end of this, you will understand why the most famous story ever told about a broken bone is almost certainly something nobody ever said. The truth underneath it is stranger and better. Start with how often this happened, because the number is not small. When paleoanthropologists, scientists who study ancient human remains, began cataloging Neanderthal skeletons, they kept finding the same thing: broken faces, cracked ribs, fractured arms. In 1995, Thomas Berger and Eric Trinkhaus published an analysis of injury patterns across the Neanderthal fossil record, and the pattern was so lopsided it needed explaining. Almost all the damage sat in the upper body: head, neck, shoulders, arms, so they went looking for a modern population with the same injury map. Not soldiers, not construction workers, rodeo riders, people who spend their working life a few centimeters from an animal that weighs half a ton and does not want them there. Berger and Trinkhaus suggested Neanderthals were getting hurt the same way, because their weapons forced them close. A thrusting spear means you have to be inside the animal's reach to use it. That comparison became famous. It is also, by the admission of the man who co-authored it, probably too neat. In 2012, Trinkhaus went back and questioned his own conclusion, pointing out that early modern humans show a similar pattern, and they threw projectiles from a distance. Fights between people would leave the same marks. Falls would too, but buried inside that debate is a detail nobody likes. Trinkhaus raised another possibility for why Neanderthal legs look so undamaged in the fossil record. Maybe the leg injuries are missing because the people who suffered them are missing. Someone who could not walk, could not reach the cave, where bodies were later preserved. The record may be quiet about broken legs, because a broken leg often meant you never got home, which brings you back to the ground, where you are lying, listening to yourself breathe. Here is what your body needs from the next 6 weeks. It needs the two ends of that bone to stay almost perfectly still while a soft collar of new tissue forms between them and slowly hardens. It needs blood. It needs protein and calories, more than usual, at exactly the moment you cannot go and get any. It needs water brought to you. It needs someone to move you when you soil the ground where you lie. And if the herds move, or the water dries, or the season turns, it needs someone to decide that the group moves slower for you, or does not move at all. That is not a medical procedure. That is a group of people making the same choice every single day, for more than 40 days in a row, while getting nothing back. And there is one skeleton that proves such a choice was made. In 1957, in Shanidar Cave in the mountains of northern Iraq, excavators uncovered the remains of a Neanderthal man they nicknamed Nandi. Formally, he is Shanidar 1. He died somewhere between the ages of 35 and 50 old for a Neanderthal. Read what his bones had been through. A crushing blow to the left side of his face, which likely took the sight in that eye. Damage that appears to have weakened his entire right side. A right arm that was fractured, withered, and ended above where the hand should be lost, whether by injury, illness, or amputation. A healed fracture in a bone of his right foot. A leg that left him with a heavy, painful limp. And bony growths deep in both ear canals, described by Trinkhaus and Sebastian Viot in 2017, which would have left him profoundly deaf. Now hold all of that in your head at once. One eye, one arm, a limp, no hearing, in an Ice Age landscape, hunting animals that could kill him. Every single one of those injuries shows healing. None of them killed him. He lived on with them, by most estimates for years, in a world where you cannot buy food and cannot phone for help. But here is where it gets uncomfortable. A healed bone, on its own, does not prove anyone loved you. You have probably heard the story. An anthropologist named Margaret Mead is asked by a student what the first sign of civilization is. The student expects a clay pot, a fish hook, a grinding stone. Mead says, a healed femur, the thigh bone, because an animal with a broken leg dies, and a human with a broken leg only survives if somebody carried them, fed them, and stayed. It is a beautiful story. It goes viral every time the world feels cruel, and there is no evidence Margaret Mead ever said it. The anthropologist Gideon Lasko traced the anecdote and found that the earliest version anyone can locate appears in a 1980 book by the surgeon Paul Brand, recalling a lecture. Mead died in 1978. When Mead was actually asked, on the record, what turns a culture into a civilization, her answer was nothing like the meme. She talked about cities, division of labor, and record keeping. Then there is the biology, which is worse for the story. Healed fractures turn up across the animal kingdom. Wild animals break bones and survive them, especially young ones. Chimpanzees have been observed pressing insects into each other's wounds. Elephants and wolves self-medicate. A bone that knitted back together is not a certificate of compassion. Sometimes it just means you got lucky and the injury was survivable alone. So the famous version is wrong. But the thing it was reaching for is real. The evidence is just somewhere else, and it is much harder to argue with. It is not in the bones that healed. It is in the bodies that never could. 4,000 years ago, in what is now Ninh Binh province in northern Vietnam, a young man was buried at a settlement called Man Bac. Archaeologists label him Burial 9. He was born with a condition that fused the bones of his spine, and by his early teens, the complications had left him paralyzed, no use of his legs, and at best minimal use of his upper body. He lived roughly another decade like that. Think about what that decade required. Someone fed him. Someone gave him water. Someone turned him, cleaned him, kept his skin from breaking down into the pressure sores that still kill people in modern hospitals. Someone kept him warm, kept him fed through lean seasons, and kept doing it every day for around 10 years in a farming and fishing village with no medicine at all. Lorna Tilley and Mark Oxenham, the researchers who published his case in 2011, used him to build an entire method for reading care out of ancient skeletons. They called it the bioarchaeology of care. Because Burial 9 could not have survived a week by luck, every day he stayed alive is a day someone chose him. And the care went further than food and water. In 2017, a team led by Laura Weyrich sequenced DNA from hardened dental plaque on Neanderthal teeth from El Sidron in Spain and published it in the journal Nature. One young individual there was clearly suffering an abscess visible in his jaw and a gut parasite that causes severe diarrhea. His plaque contained traces of poplar, a tree that carries salicylic acid, the active compound behind aspirin. It also held DNA from penicillium, the mold that gave the modern world penicillin. A sick teenager, tens of thousands of years ago, chewing the closest thing his world had to a painkiller. So picture your 6 weeks again, honestly. There is bark to chew that dulls the edge. There is no anesthetic. No clean water. No way to see whether the bone is straight. There is a good chance you end up with a leg shorter than the other one, and a limp you carry for the rest of your life. There is a real chance the wound goes bad, and nothing anyone does will stop it. And there is a fire, and there are people around it, and every night one of them brings you food they could have eaten themselves. You already know what that feels like, because your body has not changed. You have felt it in a bad flu, when someone left something outside your door. You have felt it in a hospital corridor at 2 a.m. The reason those moments hit so hard is not that they are rare. It is that they are the oldest thing about you, older than farming, older than writing, older than your species being the only human one left. The famous story got the mechanism wrong. A healed thigh bone proves less than people want it to. But somewhere in northern Vietnam, a young man who could not move his own body stayed alive for 10 years anyway. That is not a bone that healed. That is a decision, made again and again, by people whose names nobody will ever know. You hear it before you feel it. A dry snap, somewhere inside your leg. Whether that sound is the end of your life or 6 bad weeks of it has never once depended on your bone. It has always depended on who was standing close enough to hear it.